Hey, so I'm Greg Golkin. I'm managing partner of Kitchen Fund. So Kitchen Fund is a growth equity investor in the restaurant space. So we do one thing, which is find great brands that are on their growth path, provide them capital in exchange for equity in the business, and help them grow. So our reason for being is, as you all very well know, restaurants are incredibly difficult, but it's somewhat straightforward what the path is if you can execute it. And so many of the businesses are similar, using the same food suppliers, tech stack, marketing strategies, real estate site selection. And our goal at Kitchen Fund is to find great brands and great founders who've started those brands and support them on that growth path. So I think there are different varieties of I shouldn't have given you the remote.
My partner in crime. Sorry.
Do it from here. Keep talking, Greg.
Thanks.
That looks smart.
As you are, Greg.
So we're a version of somewhere between private equity and venture capital. We try to find brands usually when there are a few locations open and are ready sort of for a major expansion. And it's kind of threading a needle in terms of sizing there. But I think what we found is kind of real, like when a company has opened their first restaurant or maybe two restaurants, still figuring it out. What it will be if it wants to scale. Not every restaurant should scale, and that's not the goal. But for those who do want to scale into more larger brands, the first few locations are a lot of experimentation, figuring out what works for guests, what is going to work for guests in multiple locations, and second market, third market, and generally speaking, I think that's too early for kind of institutional capital to be involved. It puts undue pressure on a brand. So we try to come in when there are more pieces of what will we be when we grow up figured out, and we can be sort of what we think of as rocket fuel to try to help grow the brand to the next number of locations. So I think we're not. There's different varieties, as I mentioned. There's kind of seed capital. We'll talk about different types of capital. There's kind of your friends and family that may invest early on, and then there's kind of us and a few other groups in that VC growth, and then there's real private equity, which is going to come in with a playbook and want to sort of run the business almost. We're in that middle category. We actually don't believe in trying to tell a founder or management team how to run a restaurant. We think it's really important that in the growth phase, the DNA plays throughout, and it's really driven by the vision of the founders of the team.
I didn't touch it.
But we're there. That's okay. They gotta look. But we're there to be a leverage point and provide some best practices and say these are the things that have worked well for other growth brands. These are pitfalls that you might want to avoid, and try to share some learnings across the journey. So we've invested in about 14 restaurant brands over the past 7 going on 8 years now. A couple of them have gotten pretty big. Sweet Green and Cava, Dig, Gregory's Coffee are also New York brands that we've been involved with, and then we've been involved in some earlier stage businesses. Inde is at 6 locations now, and then there's some regional ones. Ojos is a brand in Texas, and EG's is in Arizona. And then by happenstance, we've gotten involved in some restaurant tech. Just again, we try to be very involved with our brands and helping them, and met some interesting tech companies that are changing how restaurants run, and from time to time we find something we want to invest in there, but that is more of a side hustle. And so we'll talk more, I think, during the conversation about kind of what we look for and how we think about metrics. I will say, saw Daniela's slide at the end there. The last slide was a very good one, so I think it's very, very aligned with how we think of the world. So hand it over to Lynda now.
Thank you. I'll give you that.
All right, let's see.
I'll change the slide. There we go.
Hi, I'm Lynda Marren, and thank you for the Beard Organization. Every conference and activity that I've taken part in that you have run has been exceptional. I really liked the talks this morning. Especially, some of them had contrasting points. I could scream, I'm Italian. Thanks. And I think the three of us are going to reinforce what some earlier speakers had to say, but also maybe even deviate from some of them. My company, Just Add Salt, has 10 pillars, and the restaurant investing is part of it. We also do corporate events that work with restaurants and entrepreneurs and bring them together. For example, we have a venture capital organization who wants to invest in sustainability tools. We bring farmers and restaurateurs to come together and talk about how they're doing zero waste. And we bring them together in a 2-day conference so they get to know each other. And of course, that happened recently, and our restaurant that we chose got all sorts of additional benefits and new investors from getting to know the venture community a little bit better. We also do food and restaurant and bar crawls, wine tours, and well, my business investing is a lot of semiconductors, a variety of other things, but the restaurant arm is really a quality of life for us. We like to invest in people we know well. We like to invest in people we've seen have success. Many of our restaurateurs are first-time restaurateurs, but we've been involved in them in other business. Maybe they had a CPG brand, or previously had a small shop and now are turning into a big restaurant. But most of them have had success in other arenas. We also do a lot of cooking for a cause. So partner with nonprofits and bring them together with investors and find ways to educate the investors on how they can help the nonprofits around cooking. For example, one of our biggest programs is a cooking school in San Francisco that is designated for people that are formerly incarcerated. And they have a 6-month training where they learn every aspect of restaurateuring, from front of house to being on the line. And then we work with their parole agents and the people in their life that are going to get them on track. And I individually am involved with 6 or 7 one-on-one people that are now in top restaurants around the Bay Area and actually in Carmel, and one out here in New York. And so the Beard organization is part of that. We've taken an opportunity to take part in the boot camp and to invest in the WELL program, and we're just very, very happy to be here. So thank you for having me.
Oh, God. Okay, here it is empty.
Live? Is that live?
No. Is it green?
Blinking.
It's once it stops blinking, then there you go. You're live.
Live now?
Hot mic. You're on the air.
I'm on air. I'm nowhere near as interesting, and I'll therefore be, I hope, shorter. No joke there intended. I made up my slide first, and I've never made up a slide like this before. So these are the investments I've made in hospitality businesses. I've only been doing it for about 16 years. And then when I looked at this, I realized I have another 40 companies I've invested in 38 funds. So evidently I don't sleep much. So I'm a lawyer and an investor, and I've stayed a lawyer. I'm a chairman of a law firm. The chairman at most law firms is the cheerleader. So I still do deals. I was asked to mention, so I've done whatever that is, 12 restaurant financings where I was principal, but I've also closed more than 300 restaurant financings through our law firm. So we have a whole team. We have a labor and employment team that deals with the horrible wage and hour stuff and discrimination challenges. We have brand intellectual property lawyers who live and breathe the brand, that the music goes off. Did I die? Did I die?
Yes. Maybe share it.
I'll share my mic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is
let's do that. So
it's got a
There you go.
it's got a bad battery. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So they don't worry about patents. They worry about trademarks, copyright, and the aura. So we have a lot of celebrity chefs because of that kind of work. And I don't drop names, that would be rude. Bobby Flay, Rachel Ray, Gordon Ramsay. I mean, it would be just silly. I don't do that kind of thing. But on that side, we do everything for restaurants. A lot of them is their financings. small and big, early stage, some quite small, although usually more than $1 million, and they range up to some very large ones. These are bets I've made myself. I do more hospitality tech investments this year than I do brand investments. When I made up this slide, it's an interesting one because I had to leave some of the names off. That's why it says successful breakfast chain. Because there's some cap tables that are secret, and I'm not going to be the one to mess it up. But if somebody were to look at that, they might not realize that Barcelona and Bartaco were one entity, and that was, I think, my most successful pure restaurant investment. And then Momofuku, I was the first outside investor in Momofuku, so people would assume, wow, that must have been a really amazing investment. No. I guess I should say we'll see. And then I was on the board and an investor in Noma with Rene Redzepi. All those years we were the #1 restaurant in the world, and people would say, well, how could that have worked? Can't make any money. One little dinky restaurant. Oh, it worked, and we got out and we made money. You'd never know. So they're interesting ones. And still Boqueria in New York City and a couple of other chains. And I do look more at fast casual. I may say this in answer to a question. I am personally not doing the deep dive that either of these two individuals do, but I have a wonderful network. So my network is successful operators, successful investors, successful accountants. Combs and Resnick is one of my favorite, and consultants to restaurant groups and technology companies. So I can do my diligence by network, but I'm basically looking for the relentlessly resourceful founder who is both driven, convinced they're right, and also willing to pivot. And you could say, how can you tell? It's a room full of women. With women, you can tell. It may sound sexist. It is very easy for men to just put that on, particularly if they sense that's what you want to hear. With women, I don't know why. I've never found one who I later said, oh, she was pretending. They show it, and if they feel it, not everybody feels it. And obviously, women entrepreneurs in this space are statistically slightly more successful. So it can't be that there's some sort of bias there. But that's what I'm looking for, and I'm also desperately looking for a business, not a store. And with restaurant tech, I'm looking for a business, not a tool. Because if you're building a restaurant and there's no other brands that it's going to come out of, no other units out of that brand, no products out of that brand, then your odds of success have just shrunk. If you have a restaurant tool, like a software product, all you can do is hope you'll be acquired. You have no ability to change, to add on, to reformat. So I'm very focused on that breadth. And then after that, I'm just trying to make a tough decision. I would close with, it's a good time to be the kind of investor I am, because there's very little competition. People are not open with their checkbooks in this space at all, with the exception of friends and family, which I suspect a lot of you in the room have figured out is the best place to fund, even an early stage group, is the people you know and your fans, both those.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All right, so let's start with a couple of questions. So we heard from operators this morning on what they ask, right, when investing and when they're looking for funding. What do you look for? Let's actually leave it off because there's no further slide, and that way we don't have a screen we don't have the lights in our eyes. Conresnick is replacing the whole equipment in this room, which is why this is happening, just so you know. So next year, top-of-the-art technology. So what are the most important elements you're looking for in an initial business plan or an initial pitch?
So I think start with qualitative and quantitative, or so I think try to keep it brief, but I think let's take the qualitative and the quantitative. I think from a qualitative perspective, I think from a brand that we're looking at, we want to see that it's doing something different. I think there's obviously unlimited competition in food, and so there needs to be a reason for being, and so having a unique vision on the space. We think it will always be an opportunity. Like guests want change, they want new ideas, and so if there's a change. The second thing tied to that is authenticity. I think what we've seen is the most successful brands are the ones that have a DNA that emanates throughout the organization from top to bottom. Is something that we've thought a lot about at Kitchen Fund that we haven't put full numbers to, but we actually think that first-time entrepreneurs are more successful than repeat founders in this business. And I think the working hypothesis on that is that when you start your first restaurant, start your first company, your passion and is everywhere in the space. So like, you know, first restaurants, like you're painting the walls, you're involved in every detail of it, and it emanates. If you've had a successful brand and then you're opening your second one, it's just may not be there. It's just a harder challenge to get that authenticity out. So authenticity, then you know, I think try to keep it brief on the quantitative side, but I think on Daniela's side, she had a number there, cash on cash returns. Like that is the number we care about. Like everything else kind of adds up to that, but what we care most about from a quantitative perspective is looking at a brand and saying, how much does it cost to open a single unit, and then what are the profits from that unit going to be? And if I think she had 33%, like that's a very good marker. I think if you're above 40%, you're sort of in that rarefied air, meaning every year your profits are 40% of how much it costs to open that restaurant. And that to us is kind of everything we look for in a model, because we don't really care what AUVs, what your revenue is. We don't really care what your margins are on their own. But that equation adds up to, is this successful to grow and to keep growing? And I'll just give a quick little background of why we care about that number. Is so if we're growth investors, we want to put capital into your business to help it grow. And our job as investors is to return money for that investment. If you're at 33%, that gives you a lot of buffer for hiring more corporate people below the operating line within an income statement, and you can keep hiring people. You can also make mistakes from time to time and remain at that 33% without it being very difficult. Because our job as private equity people, you know, would be to drive returns that are in the 20% ballpark. So if you do 33% at a store, you can hire some people, and that return is going to go down. And as long as it stays above that 20% level, we're extremely happy. And so everything we think about leads into that. And you know, how do we control the build-out costs? How do we control the margins to make sure that that's profitable over time? And I'll just put a point in there, which is that the build-out cost, while it's a single number, single point in time, you can't undo that. So that's a place that we really think a lot about. Your margins can go, your sales can change, your margins can change. Once you've built a restaurant, you can't undo how much it costs to open it. And so that's an area of the model that when we're talking to entrepreneurs, we spend a lot of time making sure we're thinking a lot about that. It's an easy place for people to say, it's only $50,000 more to add this thing, so let's just do it. It's one time. We're not going to do it again. But unfortunately, it's just something you can't remove from history once it's done.
Thank you.
Great.
Lynda, you invest in a lot of first-time owners. What do you look for?
Similar to Andy, people makes a big, big, big difference. And not just you when you come in with your pitch deck, but who you've built around you and what you say about the people that you are building your restaurant for. What do you know about the community that you're in? What do you know about the real estate that you're in? That corner spot in West Village, and who walks down that street, and who's going to walk into your restaurant, and what kind of team have you put together? On the people side, the people lead the numbers. So what kind of investors are you coming with? It's interesting because this morning there were two different speakers. One said, ask the person you don't think is going to give you money first, because that way you're practicing your pitch. And someone right after said, ask the person that you think are going to say yes absolutely first, so you get that in your back pocket. Both of those could be right, but who you ask and when you ask them depends upon what you've learned about that investor. In our case, I want to know who the investors are that you're coming in with. What are their values? What are you mentioning to me besides that al pastor that you're going to cook in your restaurant, or the cocktail that you're going to make, the vodka and the ingredients, and the fact you're going to muddle your own cocktail? What are you telling me about the team? Where are you going to source your ingredients? Who are you creating this restaurant for that are going to work for you? I like someone that mentions that they have somebody that used to be washing dishes who moved up to Peskoe, who now's on the line, who is going to be their general manager. Those kind of stories carry a lot of weight with me, because that means you're building from within, or you're building from your community, or you brought someone in from your community. So really the people, the way that you tell your story, who you put your pitch deck together is important. I'm not going to look at what your attorney you used or what financial accounting firm you used, but I'm going to be able to tell it's professional. And then when you come into a meeting with us, I set aside your pitch deck. My favorite thing is, how do you verbalize what you put into that document? So it can be perfect, but that might have been because you had a good team behind you, which we respect. And I read everything you present before you come in, but I don't look at it at all. A lot of people have said, did you even read what I brought you? Because the questions you're asking are getting me to talk, because I want to hear how you're going to present your vision, and then how you're going to talk about how you've executed something else. You might be a first-time restaurateur, but you've had success somewhere else in your world that brings relative quantitative metrics to what you're building now. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
I have my own. Do the
Yeah.
same?
Are you green?
I'm green. I'm green. So I should say that we've just met, but Greg and I are old friends, and I'm not looking for DNA or something special that no one's done before, because none of that is true. I used to think successful restaurants were 95% execution. I have learned it's 110% execution. So what I'm looking for, as I said before, is that relentlessness. I'm looking for something that can grow to be other businesses, and I'll give some examples. But I'm looking for something that makes me believe you or the team you will hire will be brilliant operators, because there's a lot of silly ideas that are huge successes, and there's a lot of great ideas, they should be great, that aren't good business successes. I wasn't only there at the beginning of Momofuku and Noma, I was there at the beginning of Shake Shack. I owned so little, it's an eyelash, it really didn't matter, but I was there, it was an accident, right? It was great execution. There are lots of restaurants that can become parts of restaurant groups. Momofuku is a group. Union Square Hospitality is a whole bunch of brands. They were never going to replicate a brand. Danny Meyer would say publicly, why would I ever repeat a restaurant? Why would I do that? Everything good about it is the creative process. And then accidentally Shake Shack happened, and he changed his couple $100 million in his pocket mind. Let Us Entertain You out of Chicago, Be Our Guest. These are older ones. Let Us Entertain You is still killing it with dozens of brands. Be Our Guest, much less so. Now absorbed, but still doing it. So there are different ways that things can grow, not just replicating the same brand. In New York, we have something called the Fireman Group. Most people have never heard of it, but if you're a New Yorker, Bond 45, Fiorello's, Trattoria dell'Arte, Red Eye Grill, Brooklyn Diner, all those are restaurants. One of them, who's a New Yorker is gonna say, ooh, I love that, that's my favorite. It's all the same group. And in fact, a couple of those, it's the same menu. Just different branding, different icons, different location, slightly different price point. So there are lots of things. I'm still desperately looking for that founder, and I am definitely focused on the payback number. But the payback number is really hard to know, because in the first few units were a struggle, and now you've got it right. I'm an investor in a group called Glaze. It used to be Glaze Teriyaki. I think they took them 7 units till they got it right, and now they had something to replicate. Shake Shack was an accident to open the first one. The second one was an Upper East Side location, and the third one was at what was then called Citi Field. I'm sorry, it was a Citi Field where the Mets play. The Mets never get in the playoffs, so it was 81 days a year of service. We then did the license, and I did that, to Al-Shaya for about 2/3 of the world. So the growth trajectory can be as ridiculous as Shake Shack, or it can be something more normal, like you just grow another restaurant. The easiest is to get your brand right and get it to 3 or 4 units to where it's the kind of thing that Greg looks at it and says, oh, you pay for yourself in 2.5 years. And you're going to get the cost of opening down. That's execution. And you're going to run the next restaurant better because you've trained managers and you have that little better and you know what to do with an expediter and something like that. Those sorts of things are all execution. So that's where my laser is.
I want to go back before we talk about what makes you walk away, but one thing that came up a lot and that both Greg and Andy you mentioned in terms of the differentiator. So Greg, you're saying you're looking for the reason of being and what differentiates a restaurant. Andy, you're saying that doesn't matter because there's so many French restaurants, Italian restaurants, American restaurants, whatever. Can we hone in on that a little bit? What is a meaningful differentiator? Is it location? Is there a meaningful differentiator?
Yeah, you know, I'm gonna hedge on this because I think there's I don't totally disagree with Andy as much as I'd like to that like differentiating is really hard. Like it really isn't. But I think I would hone in on there's a North Star for an entrepreneur, and like you need to feel like you're doing something differentiated and special. Like that like if you talk to the founders of any of the companies that you know we've invested behind, they feel like they're making the world a better place. Like period. Like I think that like the drive, that grit that you know Andy's talking about is because I would say that our entrepreneurs all feel like social impact entrepreneurs, even though it's pure capitalism. Like it really feels like social impact, and it's like they care about their communities, they care about their employees, they care about their guests in like a way that a lot of restaurants and a lot of companies just don't. And so I think that you need to have an angle that you know may feel like take Sweetgreen as an example. Like there were how many salad places in New York before Sweetgreen got here? I mean, countless. There was no need for another salad place. But they had a vision of what the brand stood for and what they wanted to present to guests and the way they would present it. And it was like that team like feels like that they are changing the world. And we can debate whether or not they are, but it drives them and everybody in that organization feels it. And it ties directly to that sort of tenacity that Andy's speaking about. So, you know, I think that's a little bit of a hedge to tie our two sides together. But that's really, you know, what we're looking for.
So the founder of Just Salad once said when Sweetgreen was starting to grow across the country, what do I want to do? I want to grow Just Salad as quickly as I can. I forget the number, maybe he said 50 units, and then sell it out to a conglomerate, and then get a job at Sweetgreen and sit in the office and think about my brand. Because right now all I think about is behind the Chipotle line, not running out of the key ingredients there. So I do get it, changing the world. I'm an active clean tech investor. That is the main place where my money goes. That's changing the world investing, because you're putting money in things that are highly risky, added risk, government policy change. You're really doing it. Restaurateurs can just be better bosses. I do get it. That is something we need. We don't need more assholes. We need more kind-hearted people who care about the careers of the people that work for them. That's great. But if somebody comes in and tells me I'm doing this because I'm changing the world. In the food investing, when you're talking about alternative protein, for example, or people who are doing the first mile of the farm, you know, farm to table, the first mile from the farm, these are all cliches, but they're real issues. They are also potentially changing the world in a positive way, we hope. Whether in the end they can, I don't know. But I would hold, and I remember meeting the Sweetgreen guys very early. They didn't ask me to invest, so I never had to be embarrassed by saying no. I also would have said no to Uber, so Thank goodness nobody asked me about that. I remember being struck by how flowery their "I'm just out of college" language was. And they weren't just out of college, but that's how they talked.
Yeah.
So, it was charming, but it obviously worked. But 1 in 100 of those works.
Yeah.
People who are great operators and are focused on the numbers that Greg's talking about and are relentless and leave themselves that room to mess up. Everybody messes up. I was an investor in Insomnia Cookies. Insomnia Cookies is a pretty good result too. Insomnia Cookies never closed a unit. They never closed a unit, meaning did they never make a real estate mistake? They had 120 units, I think, when we sold it. Now, they made lots of real estate mistakes, but it cost so little to build one of their units to sell cookies to stoned
Drunk,
college
late
students.
night.
Drunk, they're not
Yeah.
drunk, they're stoned. To college students, it costs so little that to make it worth closing it, like you're losing money, never happened. But that doesn't mean it's the best model ever. I'd still rather have Shake Shack than Insomnia Cookies. But the margin for error is really important. We had a group in New York City that I did not invest in, thank God, called Pieface, Pieface. Pieface was a very successful Australian brand making savory pies, convinced that Americans would buy savory pies. They come to the United States, they get a giant amount of money from a name I'll leave out, but it's a certain, now in disrepute, casino mega gajillionaire from Vegas. They back it, they come to New York City, I think they opened 9 units all in the first year, thinking they'll come, build it and they will come. They didn't decorate it right, they didn't staff it right, they didn't have a product that people actually wanted, except for some people at 11 o'clock who couldn't get Insomnia Cookies. But that was all execution. Were they wrong that we will eat savory pies? We'll find out. It hasn't really happened yet, but I suspect it will work. But it was all, each level of execution they got wrong and ended up in a lawsuit, but whatever.
Let's talk about what makes you walk away. And Lynda, let's start with you because you are with chefs every single day. So imagine you get approached a lot for investing. What makes you walk away? Say, not for me.
We've had a couple opportunities to invest in places that we thought we were going to invest in and we didn't. Not Uber, by the way. But one in California, actually, is a restaurant when Anne was visiting that I took her to lunch at the restaurant. I'm a regular. It's probably in our town, Burlingame, California, the highest end, best quality food, which is why when Anne was in town, I said hello for lunch there. And when I walk in, they know what I like to drink. They know what wine, if we're there at night. They'll save a private room even when it's sold out for 12 of us. If we need to, they'll find a way to get us in. And the owner asked for a meeting with me and my team, and I jumped at it because they were opening in Sacramento, which is 2 hours north of us and on the way to Lake Tahoe. And we are in Lake Tahoe all the time, and I would be able to stop by. Matter of fact, I'd probably right off the gas on the way there. And a 5,000 square foot restaurant that the space itself in a previous restaurant had been doing $5 million a year. A very successful corner in an area that needed what he does. And I was sure I was going to invest. And he walked in to the meeting with me and my team completely unprepared. And honestly, I did tell him right away, that your pitch deck looks like you just did it on the back of an envelope. Your menu thought process isn't developed. And what else are you going to do? Because rent doesn't sleep, right? The best thing, and that's probably why many of you are here, is to think of different ways you can grow your existing business. Are you expanding? Or I know Christy Vega's here. She's just got a deal with Goldbelly to sell burritos all around the world. What are you doing that makes the revenue that you have grow with the same space that you have? And none of those ideas were developed. And he has since opened that restaurant, had a year in and done extremely well. But I don't look back because to me, the preparation up front with your investors is also gonna be how you treat them when you send in the first dividend check. I might have had a dividend check by now, but the investments that we've put into the restaurants we have with people that walk in prepared and that don't treat you just like a regular, but actually think about what you like to invest in, makes a big difference. And so one takeaway from that is each one of the people you ask to invest are different. We're all very different in what we look at. Listen to their podcasts. Take a minute to just check out what they're doing. Find out what makes a difference to them. For me, I like to be closer to the business. I care about the menu development. I don't require that you involve me in that, but I like it when you do. I like it when you say, hey, do you want me to teach you how to make this cocktail that you seem to like every single time you walk into this bar? Absolutely. And that's not separate from getting 13, 15, 18% returns when you start sending us checks. That's in addition to. But what's in addition to somebody else might be that you don't call them when there's a problem. When the pandemic hit, several of our businesses came to their investors to ask, what do you think we should do? And it was 2020, March 30th, when I remember one of our restaurants saying, we think we'll just close and wait this out, maybe 2 to 3 weeks or so. And you all know what that was like. And most investors said, great, none of us had been through a pandemic. At one point, one of our bars, I said, why don't we help you find the vessels that you need to sell your cocktails on the streets on Valencia Street? And while people are home making bread, they really liked having batch cocktails in their homes, right? And that worked out. And just the fact that they cared about an opinion that was different than other investors made me buy in, which is why I would walk away from someone who said, I just want you for your checkbook, I don't want your ideas.
Did you feel you were taken granted by the owner you mentioned?
The one who we had lunch with?
Yeah.
I think you meant, oh, absolutely not.
Okay.
Somebody mentioned earlier that they don't get calls back sometimes with someone that's interested, and she said, just leave them, go on to another investor. I have to say, sometimes people get busy. Until they say no, don't expect it's no. Don't assume it's no. I don't think anyone should string you along and waste your time and ask other people along the way. But if someone doesn't say no, they're not being. They might still have maybe in there. So keep asking, because if you get 9 no's, you're that closer to that 10th person, and that might be the yes.
Greg, what makes you walk away?
So I think thinking about our model, where we get involved with brands, and like that's really what we are excited about. I think the first and easiest thing is on the economics. Like the seeing whether or not there is a model that's there, and it's never perfect when we get involved. It's never perfect. I mean, almost ever, even once it grows really large. But seeing that we understand how improvements to an economic model can work to make stores successful, that's usually the first place where we say no. Is we say, there's no margins here. They don't, the entrepreneur doesn't really know how they're going to drive margins. That's usually the easiest no. If we get past that and we say, okay, there is a model here, I think it next goes to kind of a people question and understanding the founder and what they're doing. And I think, on Andy's point on execution, I think we can tell that most based on 2 things. One of which is their vision of where they want to go. To some extent, it doesn't need to be like the 10-year. Here's how we're huge, but the few-year, what is the growth plan? And 2, the handle on the numbers. And I think this is kind of similar to what Lynda was saying about her experience with that lunch, the underpreparedness about the lunch. Is a good founder knows their business, and that doesn't mean they're doing everything, and oftentimes it's better if they're not doing everything, but they've got their hands on how the business works, what's good, what's bad, what are margins. And I think we've seen some businesses that we actually really like, where we say the model's here, but they can't tell us anything about how what the margins are, how it works. And so that kind of handle on the business is kind of checked too. And I think those are the I think once we get past those two, then we're in like real diligence, and it gets much more complicated in terms of whether or not we walk away or not. But I think those are the two first ones that we have to filter. And I think unfortunately, my job most of the time is to save time for entrepreneurs and for ourselves to say no really quickly. Like that is the unfortunate part of the job is there are a lot of restaurants or a lot of brands trying to grow, and courtesy to the teams and to my team is we have to filter things and say this isn't going to fit, and we need to get there really quickly. Those are probably the two fastest filters we've got to get there.
It saves time too.
Andy, I want to switch a little bit about to the structure of things. We've talked about that a little bit this morning, and you have talked about some of the things you walked away from. So I think that's good to get you to talk about that. In our prep call, you were talking about correcting prior investment structures that no longer work. And you have a couple of examples of that. So what do you do as an investor when something doesn't work and you need to correct it?
So there's sort of an inherent contradiction in the way restaurants are funded early and restaurants are funded later. And that's not your fault. And I often am sitting in meetings saying, now that I finished telling you everything that's wrong with what you've done so far, it's not your fault. You did everything right because now you're here. But it is the normal structure for funding small restaurants or large restaurants is at the unit level. And it happens also to be an accident of history. That's how real estate was funded. So when they were first doing real estate developments, you collected money from a few people who had it. The person who was the developer was building it would always just get a little piece of the profit once those people got their money back. And that's how people generally fund restaurants. If you're the Smith in New York or you're Gordon Ramsay, you might be able to open a restaurant, get the money you want to build it, and only give them 10 or 20 or 30% of the upside once they get their money back. Normally, it's a much bigger bite, but you then end up with a structure where you have a restaurant here, which should always be its own separate entity. Every taxi cab in New York City is an LLC or a corp. Every single one is its own LLC or a corp for liability purposes and liability purposes only. Your unit should always be its own thing for slip and falls, for claims from employees, for fights with landlords, whatever it is. You have that unit. It is now owned by another one. Typically, in that entity is the investors who've agreed to invest in this round. That's usually the only way you can attract them. If you say, I want to put another level above it, and that's my great tapas holding company, they may say, gee, I don't like that, or how many restaurants are you going to build? And also, you're giving away a piece of your whole future when all they're giving you is a little money to fund your first restaurant. So you end up with this. In that entity often is the brand. Usually we meet clients for the first time, and we, especially if they're partners, I say, do you own the brand personally? And they answer whether it's trademarked or not. And then I say, that's something with the government, but who owns that if you did trademark it or didn't trademark it? And they look at each other, and one of them says they own it, and the other one says, no, I own it. And then we eventually get the paperwork, and it's not clear. Probably they described it to those initial investors, so probably the brand is owned by that entity that only owns one restaurant. So you very early on want to be mindful where your brand is. Your brand should be outside that first unit, because those people are not investing in a chain, they're investing in one restaurant. Once you get to the point where you have 5 restaurants, five entities that each have a restaurant under that, you want to group it all together. You want to group it all together because then you can take the profit from this, and this restaurant to build that restaurant. You can go to a bank and borrow on behalf of this entity, this entity, this entity, this entity, and this entity, and you get much better terms. You can go to a landlord and say, I own all these things. They're all owned at the top. You can go to investors like this and say, oh, you have a rolled up enterprise. That's much more valuable to us. Literally, it's the same businesses rolled up are worth more. That is a moment. You're stuck with that. We call it a roll-up. Sometimes these are public. The founders of Barcelona and Bartaco were once very public, so I can use them as an example. When they had 6 Barcelonas, 1 open Bartaco, and they had already built but hadn't opened yet the second one. This is years before we sold it for $315 million. Nice number. Before that, we were rolling it up. They had 88 individual investors. And so we had to go around to 88 individual humans. And the 2 founders did it brilliantly. They thought about it. They went with a speech. We were buying them out. And they went to each one of them and said, you've supported me early on. It worked out for you. It worked out for me. Support me one more time and take this check in full retirement of your interest. One guy sued. Everybody else, though, it worked well. But that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, and we do for my clients, is when we open each of these entities, we put in something called a roll-up clause. We made this up, which gives the founders the power to cause that to be put into a holding company at a later date. That is something which other people don't do. It's very powerful, because then when you're going later, instead of negotiating with those 88 people, they could have gone around to those 88 people and said, I don't need your permission, I need your blessing. Sounds like Fiddler on the Roof. That's what we want, and that works very well, and I've watched it work. But the key thing is, think about where your brand is, finance your company whatever way you can, roll it up as soon as you can. Your accountants and the co-investing people do this religiously, will ask you to form yet another company and call it a management company, which is where they will employ you and your top people. That's where they'll run benefits and healthcare through, things like that. And then they'll say it's a break-even company. That's quite complex, but it generally does work, and it's worth it. One last thing, just because I see it so often, somebody tries to tell you to be a sub-S corp, push back, say no, and if they're an accountant and they keep insisting on it, get another accountant. You want to be an LLC or a C corp. We can talk for a long time which is better, depending on what your business is or what you're going to be, but you don't want to have an S corp. You're going to end up wrestling with it later. Is that too long an answer?
That was a good answer.
Okay.
I would, from the investor perspective, I'll just mention a couple things on top of it. I completely agree with what Andy said, and we've been part of, as we've funded, being part of the catalyst for that roll-up. And good investors are very comfortable with that. They understand, like, you got to get funded early on, however you've got to get funded. And I would say investors are a very good catalyst for it, because generally speaking, if there are a handful of restaurants that have their own, ownership over 4 restaurants, as Andy described, and a group comes in and says, we're going to put X amount of money on the balance sheet to grow this into a big brand. At that moment, oftentimes the investors on that restaurant level are very willing to negotiate, because they don't really want to be kind of, as would say, sort of orphaned at one restaurant. They may say, I want to be part of this bigger vision. And so something we've often, we've probably done this 3 or 4 times where we've had to, had this roll up, where we say, okay, just roll into the equity, the ownership of that new kind of parent company, and come along on the ride with us. And usually investors are very excited about that. Maybe they've taken some dividends or they've made some money along the way, but now excited to be part of the big company, building.
It does get hard. We've done, I think we counted up, including retail, more than 50 roll-ups. And one of the things that's hard is if the people in restaurant number 1 got their money back times 2, and the people in restaurant number 2, which struggled, have gotten 20% of their money back, and the people who bet on restaurant number 3 is doing well, and they think it's going to be great, they've almost got their money back, and number 4 has just opened and it's killing it, and they say, I don't want to be diluted by the people at that crappy restaurant number 2. So you have to do some diplomacy, and I'm sure must be somebody this morning said keep relations with your investors as positive as possible. That's one of the moments when you're going to them and trying to explain to them what Greg just said. This is good for you. Instead of owning 4% of one unit, you're going to own 0.4% of a chain that we believe is going to the moon, but you're not going to get dividends anymore. That's a hard conversation, particularly if they're not a professional restaurant investor, and 99% of them are not professional restaurant investors. So that is a huge help when you have an investor, more than just the impetus, they're providing the capital so you can write checks to get people to go away. If they don't like it, you say, then I'll just give you a check. And they can sit in a meeting with you. They don't want to be the one doing the deal, but they can explain and make it all sound, oh, that's how this industry works. So it is a huge advantage if you can have a Greg at the table at that moment.
And Greg, can I ask you to talk about why your investment structure and investment types should depend on your vision for growth for your restaurants, probably before, like day minus 365.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hinted at here already, which is whether or not there are two restaurant models essentially. Either you're building a individual restaurant that plans on giving dividends out and taking profits and sending them out to investors over time, and that's a very standard model. If you're building one restaurant, you're building two, three, that's a great model, and you know that's what investors like. And I think for that type of structure, which is you're probably funding it at each restaurant, usually that's a high net worth of friends and family, fans, as Andy said, like going to your fans and getting investment that way. That's one model. The second is the vision of saying, I'm building a chain. And like I have vision to say, I want 50 of these, I want 25 of these, whatever the number is, 200, and that's a different structure. And they're if when we're investing in a brand, we want full alignment with the entrepreneur over everything, right? Like that's really important to us. We don't want there ever to be a moment where something that a founder is focused on is different than what's good for a kitchen fund, and that's why we need the roll up. Because as Andy pointed out, there could be, if you have 4 individually funded restaurants, one of them's killing it, one of them's sleepy, the attention of the founder is most likely going to be on what works, and oftentimes, they don't really want to focus on the thing that doesn't work, and they may even want to close it. And that may be the right thing to do for the enterprise, but we need to be aligned on that to be sort of at the level with the founder to say, let's do what's right for the ecosystem, not just for one restaurant or another.
Or they take the best manager from the one that's killing it and put them in the one that's hurting.
Yeah, exactly. You just never want. And we've seen there's a concept we saw, and I won't name names, but it was a concept that was a few bakeries, and they were individually funded, and one bakery was making glaze for another one, and the investors in the one over here sued the one that was selling glaze because they thought they were gouging them by a penny on every ounce of glaze that was coming, and it destroyed. I mean, it was horrible for the team, because it was this internal fight over some alignment issue on how glaze was getting priced from one baker to the other. And so, at some, we happen to believe in the roll-up structure because we think it just aligns everybody. I will also say that for, as a side point, Andy mentioned LLCs and C Corps as the two structures. Generally speaking, a lot of funds will not invest in LLCs. I'll just mention that because LLCs, you're passing income and losses through to your investors, and a lot of funds have international investors who do not want to be U.S. taxpayers. And so it doesn't always economically make sense that they want to be a C Corp, but there are a number of funds that, and we've got some European investors in our fund. When we invest in an LLC, we have to do a lot of shenanigans behind the scenes to protect them from becoming U.S. taxpayers. So we have to put blockers in place to capture the taxes, et cetera. So funds generally like C Corps at some point. Again, that's a correctable, not saying it's bad. That is a changeable decision at some point. There can be tax implications, but probably in 3 or 4 of the brands that we've invested in, they were LLCs early in life and then became C Corps later in life as they went down that growth path.
But overwhelmingly, an LLC can become a C Corp without any tax implications, and overwhelmingly, making a C Corp into an LLC is a full realization of all the value that's there, hugely taxable. So between those two, as you said, they're blockers, but between those two, that's when you need a good accountant. And just to get it in, I don't know when it's nice to have lawyers like my team who live and breathe restaurants. It's much more important to have accountants who live and breathe restaurants. That you don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what they don't know. If your accountants just have 1 or 2 restaurants, or even 10 or 20, the odds that they can give you what you need because it occurs to them every day is very small. Everybody can't afford Cohn Resnick, or one of the few firms that can do what Cohn Resnick does. They're nowhere near as expensive as the giant firms, but they're the best ones for restaurant stuff. But there's lots of 2, 3, 4 person or small accounting firms which do a lot in this space. You really want that. You need that benefit.
Lynda, I want to talk about you mentioned that having a broad investor base is important for you, and also before we turn into the audience question, how to approach your regulars. That was something you mentioned. How to approach the people who are in your ecosystem that you should be asking money.
Sure, because you don't know if somebody who's one of your regulars has an LLC and invests in restaurants. Certainly, we were last night at Isodi and had the most delicious Italian meal with a group of us, and afterwards talking with the owners, we hadn't mentioned when we made the reservations that that's something we do. I didn't know they were expanding a little bit more. So you have to assume that everybody who comes into your restaurant 1 or 2 times, who's just not a tourist off the street, could be someone that could assist you. And they might not be somebody who's invested in restaurants before, but they might be someone who has an excess of capital that they're willing to support something they care about. And they might be an attorney. And that would be great if you had an attorney and an accountant who knows about restaurants, who happens to come into your restaurant. But it might be someone who knows real estate really, really well. So to me, the broad base gives you free services of people that care about you. They care about your success. They're invested in your success. And you don't know that if you don't ask them. So I was talking to a restaurateur recently about keeping a network, even if you don't have you don't take reservations, which I highly recommend you do take reservations, but there are, of course, fabulous restaurants that don't. If you don't take reservations, find a way that you're finding out who your foot traffic is. And take the time to have somebody in your office, somebody who's, when the restaurant isn't open, is doing some work to do a little bit of research on who those people are, what do they do, and then make sure you get to know them. One of the best impacts we had recently with a restaurant that we invested in Carmel, California, and I don't think they'll mind me sharing, it's 2 chefs, husband and wife chef from here, who were very successful in top restaurants in New York, moved to Carmel, opened their first restaurant, and had a really broad base of investors, including people that knew a lot about food and all the areas that you need in a restaurant. But those investors didn't have a network and didn't come frequently to Carmel. We happened to spend a lot of time in Carmel, and I've been there from the opening party to every other week, stepping in and seeing the restaurant grow and thrive, and also see when it's off season, when they're not doing well. And one of the requests that I made, because I'm just someone who's in the restaurant, was to have the chef come out more. And like many of you, he is a food person that cares about others, but he actually is a little bit behind the scenes. He actually is an introvert. And he said, but I like making sure everything's perfect in the kitchen. I said, if you're doing well, the kitchen is also doing perfection, and you're out talking to people. And all of a sudden, he had 3 new investors within the first 3 months, and then they just got their, within less than a year before they opened, they got a Michelin star. And his wife called me and said, we've gotten advice from our attorneys, we've gotten advice from investors, we've gotten financial advice, but that advice to bring Johnny out and have him talk to people has made a huge difference in people coming back. So to me, just realizing that your investors have an opportunity to share what they know, and some of them might want to just write a check, but a lot of them could add value if you ask. And so get to know who's walking in the door, and then each one of them have a network. Someone asked me how I ended up in this panel, and I said just the people that I talk to that I know, and each one of you, your investors that you ask, the people that you pitch, they want a reason why you came to them. And it might be because I love eating at Sweetgreen, which I do. It might be because you know somebody who introduced you to someone, but that connection, more than just a LinkedIn technology, but a connection of someone picking up the phone and saying, hey, would you like to meet with Andy because he certainly could help your business, it goes a lot further than just meeting with somebody or asking them for a meeting without knowing them. So building on the connections that you have and having a broad base of investors will give you a bigger network.
Carmel and Tahoe are the places you frequent. I was in Brooklyn. No, on the way to Aspen, I was in Naples, Florida. There last night, very, very late. That's how I flew in here. But I was taken out to dinner at a local Japanese restaurant. My friends who live there, their absolute favorite one. Like everything in that part of Florida, it's in an ugly strip mall. It's wonderful, wonderful, creative sushi, and I was really impressed by it. And I didn't make any fuss. Sometimes I asked to meet the owner. Sometimes I asked to see the kitchen. I didn't do any of those things. And then at the end, the owner, who was Thai, it's always neat that Japanese restaurants are owned by somebody else, comes out, and he was the chef and he'd been trained in Japan, comes out, introduces himself and pulls up a chair and sits there and talks to us for a while and asks for my card, all this stuff. And my friend, who was paying for dinner, said, how did that happen? How could they know you? I said, there is no chance they know me, but I put my name in the stupid wait list. They don't take a reservation, the stupid wait list Yelp thing, and I put my actual last name in. I didn't know that you don't. You're supposed to put your name in and your first initial. I didn't know. And so they must have looked me up during dinner and came out, and I would, be very glad to help them with their next restaurant. But I thought that was, it just showed some initiative from this obviously incredibly smart guy who had plenty of chefs to keep the food coming very quickly while he was out making hay, as it were.
Great
Questions
story.
from you all? Yeah.
This is a question that is actually on funding and managed query. I know Andy, I looked up some of the companies that you were.
Can you speak up so the back of the room can hear you as well?
Yes.
Don't hesitate to get up when you're asking a question, actually. Let's do that.
We will repeat the question and change it as we repeat it.
So this is just a brief question on customer acquisition cost. So in your opinion, and I know that you all have like diverse backgrounds in your funding, but in your experience, what do you think it's a reasonable CAC for a niche product, say like a cocktail mixer at its launch phase? And how should that number evolve as the business grows? Keeping in mind that I acknowledge that it'll vary based on like your marketing strategy and that other factors, but I wanted to get your opinion on that.
So I understand you're talking about a ready-to-drink consumer packaged product? Is that what you're describing?
It's a cocktail mixer for pitching to, it's a mocktail, so called mocktails that I've worked on for a couple of years. And I've done a lot of research in developing it and testing it, but I wanted to know the CAC cost specifically. I've hit a hiccup in that research, and I just wanted to hear your perspective on it. Customer acquisition costs.
Oh, you
For
Yeah.
customer acquisition.
Customer acquisition costs, yeah.
I mean, you're saying what should be the right customer acquisition
Not
cost?
necessarily right, because I know it'll vary. What's a reasonable?
Well, that's actually a really, she's asking what's a reasonable customer acquisition. She said CAC, which is what I'd get. Customer acquisition cost for a mocktail that she's developing, and it's really pretty easy. So Greg, why don't you answer?
I sort of saw that coming.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know. I'm not good at CPG. I don't like selling things to restaurants. I mean, I think I don't know actually how to market to restaurants and how much you should be spending. If you're talking about selling something to a restaurant or within a restaurant.
It's not in a restaurant. So I wasn't clear.
Oh.
It's directly selling it's online business.
Okay.
And then ideally, I would like to carry it in stores and bodegas,
Perfect.
higher in.
I see. Okay, well then Lynda's the expert.
I mentioned earlier that you should build your network. I do have a couple organizations that have CPG, and I can connect you with one that has had great success recently. So reach out to me after, because I don't have the answer, but I know someone who does.
I represent 2 chicks. That should be your model. Whatever they do, whatever those, it's only one woman now, but whatever those 2 women do, follow that.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to a couple of people who have not yet asked questions. Michelle?
I think my question, hi, I'm pretty loud, I think everybody can hear me, is for Andy. So basically, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
So basically, when you're talking about the company structure, and you said don't do an S corp, which my accountant did want me to do an S corp, but I've actually just recently gotten rid of him and got a different accountant. So I am curious, one, as to why not an S corp, just out of curiosity, but more so are you saying basically have each of your businesses be their own LLC, your business be an LLC, I remember Michael mentioned this in our wealth thing, your brand and trademark be its own LLC, and all of that owned under one holding company?
That's the goal.
Okay.
So the question was,
when
what's
you
the right
say roll
structure?
up, well, I'm just making sure that was correct. And when you say roll up, you're talking about the roll up is all of those under one company. That is the roll up?
No, the
Okay.
roll up, and it's confusing. If each of your units, whatever those units are, let's assume it's a restaurant or a store, should have its own entity. It's a wholly owned entity by something else, so it doesn't have to do annual tax returns. It exists. It costs you a few $100s a year. It's not this expensive thing. When we say roll up, we mean having that entity be wholly owned by a holding company at the top. So here is Shake Shack, the entity, the public entity, and actually their structure is much more complex, but I'll leave it out. Individual entities underneath it sign individual leases, and that's what you want. But you can't necessarily start there. You can't tell your investors, oh, I'm going to build a huge chain. You're investing in the first store which isn't open. So invest at a valuation of $12 million. So give me your, $120,000, and I'll give you 1% of this holding company, which someday will have 100 restaurants. And they'll stare at you, and then you say, okay, give me your $120,000, and you can own 10% of my first restaurant only. And they might say, that makes sense to me. So now you have individual minority owners at each unit. The roll-up is when you get rid of all those minority investors and pop them into the holding company. And we call it a roll-up. I don't have another better term for it, and I would love that. If anybody has a good analogy to explain it to people, I don't have one. There's sort of nothing in life where you do it. I mean, one thought I had once, it's when you have a lot of grandchildren and they all marry losers, and you get rid of all those losers all in one fell swoop, and they marry their cousins instead. But that sort of that didn't really go over well. No, I just thought of that now. That's how my mind works. But if you have a better analogy to explain it, because I did a bad job if you didn't know what it was.
We call those starter marriages.
Is each unit its own LLC?
Yes, you have to own LLC the same way that taxi cab is only for liability. That's all it is. And it's not because you expect to go to trial. It's when somebody slips and falls and some lawyer writes a letter and says, they were hurt terribly, I want $850,000, and I'm going to sue you. And you say, you is this one unit, and we make $200,000 a year profit total. So what do you want to do? And then you settle magically for $5,000.
That I get. Every one of my businesses is its own LLC. But
Right.
there's
And why is an S corp bad? For a series of reasons.
Yeah,
We have
various.
some great accountants in the room who could lay it out, but basically it's very, very minor short-term savings, and it's a little cheaper to form, but structurally in the long run, it is the least flexible liability limiting entity that there is. So therefore, an LLC, a limited liability company, is liability limiting. A C corp, any corporation, any Inc., same thing, are liability limiting anythings. An S corp and a C corp are IRS provisions. They refer to Section C or Section S. And if you become a Section S, you're only allowed to have certain kinds of shareholders. You're only allowed to have one class of stock. And when you get rid of that S, which you'll have to do to possibly get an investment from either of these, you have a taxable event that you have to work around. If you have an LLC, you can either take an investment at that level or become a C corp or put a C corp above it. There are various things. So, put a C corp above it. Being an S corp, it's too restrictive.
We'll do a couple more questions. I'll ask that those questions and answers be brief, if okay. There was a question on the second row back there. Was it answered?
Hello, I'm Javon Price. Nice to meet you guys. Thank you for coming. My whole question was about the S corp and why it is not beneficial to actually have for a small business.
So my very short answer, since I was just criticized, same thing I just said. Thank you.
Go ahead, yeah.
How does a founder get a meeting with one of you or an investor group?
How does a founder get a meeting with one of?
So I think most of us have some sort of link on our website, and I'd say most funds and investors pay attention. Like, it doesn't mean it's like a hunt. Sometimes they end up in a spam folder, but I think generally speaking, somebody's seeing them. So I think that's good. I think even better, finding warm intros, like navigate LinkedIn, like find that warm intro. Even a message on LinkedIn I find to be an effective way to get to people. So I think that networking game, finding those mutual contacts is usually best.
For me, I like to hear that there's a reason why you want to get to know Just Add Salt. So my first thing would be follow Just Add Salt on Instagram, and then notice that one of you is from Durham, and that I'm always in Durham because I'm stalking my senior in college and I want to see him, and you say, hey, I have a coffee shop that I'm opening here, come see me. So one little thing, it can be so short, that connects you to the person that you're reaching out to, makes a big difference. And oftentimes that's somebody you know, but it's not always. So I would say take the time to figure out where they are and what they're doing first, and then just give them one line that piques their interest. Boss?
As investors, how do you perceive companies that are looking at and putting together a philanthropy component to their business? So starting a foundation.
Starting a foundation, how do they perceive the philanthropic elements of starting a business?
In the end, investors care about the numbers, but I don't invest in anybody that doesn't answer the question well of what are you doing for the world? Who do you care about? Where are you putting your effort? And I would say everybody that's here is here for a reason. And you're here under the guise of an organization who cares about the world and people. I was going to get a picture of all of you guys, so that's when my phone ended up here. And so I see that as a real draw. But as an investor, also people want to make sure that you're not spending too much time giving away your profits, and that they're going to see returns on their investment.
Go ahead. You're good on your question? Okay, back there to the right, yeah.
Hi. As investors in restaurants, since we just went through a major pandemic, like if people are looking for money today, do you look at their numbers for the last 3 years, since a lot of us have had boots on our necks and we have been able to be profitable since the pandemic? Like, how do you gauge that now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. It's hard. I think that the answer has been hard. I think we've now, depending on where the business is located, there have been very different sort of pandemic cycles where there are actually parts of the country that did better in the pandemic and then came down, and places like New York where we have a lot of investment that has just got totally crushed and, maybe, has come back now, but not to 2019 levels. I think we try to put the puzzle together, and if the business was around before the pandemic, we take a look at that, then we see kind of what happened during the pandemic and how it's bounced back since. I think generally speaking, our view is, for the past 6 to 12 months, that's the new normal, and so we know what the business looks like, and there's not anything kind of magical that's going to happen to change directions from here. New York and urban centers may, keep improving a little bit month to month or year to year, but this is the new normal. But it is a complicated puzzle of trying to figure out what is the underlying business with all that noise in the numbers.
But for you, don't, as people were doing for a while, skip 2021. Don't get financials that just skip a 9-month period. Put it in a different color if you want and say these are the months that we thought were most pandemic affected, and here's why and here's how. A lot of places say here's the first 4 months where we were thrashing around and didn't know what we're doing, and then all of a sudden here are great 2 months because we figured we could sell cocktails on the street, and my goodness, was that great. And then after that, I wouldn't go as far as Greg said to say I know what the new normal is, because we've been wrong now for 3 years. He may well be right, and he knows more than I do, but I love to see people say, and I'm not sure what's going to happen, but we've got it right now, and we're flexible, and then show off. Look how I handle this, look how I handle that, so that you try to turn it into a positive of how you navigated that time, because things are going to keep changing to some degree. We don't know how.
And then if you have a story of what you did accomplish, did you do some visionary work? Did you meet with your investors and learn something new? Did you take a class besides just a baking or a workout class, something that contributes to your business? Share that as well. The financials are important, but we have one restaurant that was starting to worry about his employees not coming back because they had to be closed for 3 months, and he and I put together a plan, and we sent them all on a ski trip, and we brought them together with their spouses, and we got snowboard instructors, and it's a Michelin star restaurant that also has James Beard and a James
Tahoe? Did you send them to Tahoe?
I didn't mention where. I didn't say where. But essentially they came to their investors and said, do you have any ideas? And the ideas are what we brought to the table. And then, yeah, we all pitched in too, got them ski instructors. And then the best thing about it was all of the chefs that were in business where they went skiing were nervously cooking for these really star chefs. And it was a win-win all around. So if you have a story of something you did to pivot, tell that story.